name is Jackie. I'm your event host this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I have the great pleasure of introducing our guest, Karen Olson. So a little bit about her before we get started. Karen is the author of the Annie Seymour Mysteries, the Tattoo Shop Mysteries, and the Black Hat Thrillers. Joining us here tonight to celebrate her newest novel, An Inconvenient Wife, which has been described as twisty, sly, and utterly unique. A sinfully entertaining one-sitting read, which are my personal favorite. So definitely one that you want to get your hands on. We will have time for Q&A as well as a signing line after the event. So if you haven't gotten your copy yet, you can pick it up at one of our registers, and then we'll be signing around the corner at the info desk where you came inside. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
You're here. I recognize some of you, but not all of you, and that's always a good sign. Thank you to RJ Julius for having me. I said to my husband at dinner, I said, I don't know if I'm going to be upstairs or downstairs, and I'm happy I'm downstairs. There's enough people. My last book, I was upstairs, but it's great to come here because I love this bookstore. It's, you know, it's amazing, as most of you probably know, and you know, my hometown bookstore basically, because I grew up in Madison. So, and I haven't done this for 6 years, so forgive me if I'm a little awkward. It's been a long road to this book. I don't know how many of you have seen it already. My publisher's calling it a modern Tudor mystery, which it is kind of a mystery, but to me, it's more of a domestic suspense, and it's a modern retelling of Henry VIII and his wives. When I was 14, I read a book called A Crown for Elizabeth. And as somebody recently said, Elizabeth was my gateway drug to the Tudors. I had to write a book report for school, and I just fell in love with Elizabeth and the whole story, and being introduced to the Tudors and Henry VIII and the six wives. I mean, it was insane. And then he killed 2 of them, and it's just, you know, it was a story that was just fascinating, and honestly still fascinates people, you know, 500 years later. I have rows of biographies in my house. Henry, his wives, his children, then we have the offshoots. We have Lady Jane Grey, we've got Mary Queen of Scots. I just got a book about the Dudleys. So there's actually a whole separate book about the Dudleys now. And it's like so excited to find this. I'm just like this total Tudor geek. I don't generally read fiction about the era, because who needs to fictionalize this? Because the stories are insane, and there's murder and there's mayhem. But I don't know, it was maybe 15 years ago, I started thinking, you know, I think I need to do something with these Tudors that are in my head. I have to figure out if I'm ever going to write about them. And since I'm not a historian, I was like, well, I can't write any sort of history because I'm not really qualified. And I don't really want to do that in-depth research that's required. And God knows I don't want to do footnotes. So I started thinking, you know, maybe if I should bring them into the 21st, you know, well, then it was the 20th century. Because it seems like it could be kind of easy to modernize them. Henry, at the time, I really was thinking more Rupert Murdoch, but my agent said, you know, he's kind of like Donald Trump. And I said, oh, that's a little scary. But he is in a lot of ways, but not every way, fortunately. But I kept thinking Rupert Murdoch, and so I said, well, he could be a CEO and a billionaire, and he owns all these international communications companies. But then I started thinking about the wives, and they're all just really fascinating women. They were all very progressive for their time, very intelligent in most cases, except maybe for Catherine Howard. They were all smarter than Henry was. And I said, boy, I think you could easily take these women and bring them into present day. And so I started kind of noodling around with the story. And like I said, it was about 15 years ago. And the book actually started as a police procedural, but it always started with a headless body. Because how could you not start a book about Henry VIII without a headless body? And, being a crime novelist, that's a very logical place to start. It just kind of evolved through the years. I started it and then I dropped it because then I got, distracted by the tattoos. And then when the tattoos were over, I went back to it. Then my agent died. And I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And then my new agent decided he liked my Black Hat books. So I've been sort of fits and starts for a really long time with this, but it's always been in the back of my mind. And, it's been fun to take the history that I know and sort of twist it around. People who know the history pretty carefully are probably not going to be entirely thrilled with where the book goes, because I realized I had to sort of let go of the history after a while, because if you stick too close to the history, it's very confining. And once I told myself, okay, I don't have to go exactly the way history went, it was very, very liberating. And I actually was able to finally finish the book. So it does go to a place that now that my agent is pushing me to write the next book, I'm like, okay, now I have to bring it back to the history because it's so far away from it, but I'm working that out. So it's been an awful lot of fun to, take all of this crazy Tudor knowledge that I have and put it into this story about these women who, it was kind of hard to explain why someone like the sixth wife would actually marry him. Because why would you? He's had 5 wives, he just sort of discards them at will. He's not exactly, the greatest husband, he's a good businessman. And that was one of my biggest things is, okay, I have to say why these women would keep marrying him. But, one of the things I couldn't do is, he needed to have a son. It's like, yeah, that wouldn't happen today. So that went by the wayside. And the whole thing about, let's dissolve all the monasteries. Well, I don't think that could happen today either. So I just was like, well, there's company takeovers and, stockholders and all of that stuff. So we can go in that route. So, it was just sort of massaging the story a little bit so that, it could translate into today's world. Please ask questions. Because I'm not sure what else you want to know. Oh, I knew you would ask me a question. Good.
Do you think there's something about the Tudors that appeals to teenage girls? Because I know a lot of people of our generation who were kind of obsessed with them in the same way that you described. So do you think it's just the constant marrying and beheading and divorcing?
Yes, I think so. Although I did start with Elizabeth, who in A Crown for Elizabeth, she was a young girl. And it just sort of shows how she progressed. So I think I could relate. Well, I couldn't relate to her. I mean, she was like 13 or 14, and my life was totally different than that when I was 14. But there's just something about the period which I think it still appeals to people. I mean, look, we've got a whole Broadway show now about the wives. So I think the wives are really the key. I mean, but you read about this man who, he killed 2 of his wives for really nothing. Well, the second one was guilty, the first one wasn't. So, I don't know. I think it resonates with a lot of people, this story. For who knows, the Tudors weren't around that long. They started with, Henry's grandfather, Owen Tudor, and he had a very dubious, connection to the crown. And then his father killed Richard III and became king. And for the rest of the time he was king, he was killing anybody who would say, oh, you're not really supposed to be king. So
Voter fraud. Yeah.
yes, exactly. Exactly. There were actually two people who, came forward and, said, oh, we're supposed to be king and you're not. And he got rid of them. So the beheading started with the father. It sort of continued. And then, once Elizabeth was gone, that was it. The Tudors were over. So it wasn't that long, but everybody is fascinated by these people who, and I think it was the wives. I mean, that's like the central story. Everybody kind of knows that story. I mean, gosh, who was it? Herman Hermit sang that song about Henry VIII. They don't know that. They come to the North Haven Fair every year and sing it.
So an observation, I did see the Broadway show when it was off Broadway in Hartford. It's all about the question, it's kind of a crack question. So early in your career, you were a journalist, and then you went on to Yale working for journals like London and stuff like that, and then you became a novelist. And I'm curious about the transition from one to the other, and in particular, moving from dealing with sort of just information to novel writing, which really we deal in the realm of emotions and feelings and certainly facts, because it sounds like this is well grounded in history too. But just curious about your observations about that and making that transition from one to the other.
I was a writer. I started writing novels while I was a journalist.
Oh, good for you.
So I was writing at 3 o'clock in the morning when I came home from being a copy editor at the New Haven Register. So I was writing novels throughout all of this. It was also nice to write novels while I was working at the medical school, editing a medical journal, because it gave me a little bit more to think about. But my first book was, my first series is with a police reporter in New Haven. They say write what you know, so I did. And now I just think, oh, poor Annie Seymour, she got laid off sometime. She's not working anymore. Or if she is, she's not happy wherever she is. So it's just, I've been writing throughout the whole, so there wasn't really, I always wanted to be a novelist, but I said, oh, I have to make some money. Of course, then I got into journalism and I was eligible for food stamps. So it's, that was kind of a silly, but I did have a day job. And I had benefits, such as they were at that point. It wasn't until I got to Yale that I had better benefits. The union.
Tell me about Hidden. I just love it. I love it so much. I couldn't put it down.
Hidden is the first in my Black Hat series, with a woman computer hacker. I started that book with only the first sentence in my head is she's been missing, I've been missing for 15 years. And I had no idea who she was, why she was missing, or anything about the story. And it just, suddenly she was a computer hacker and she stole all this money and she had to go into hiding, and she lived on Block Island for 15 years with, off the grid. And it was, that was a fun series to write. So that's, yeah,
I can put it down.
thank you. There's 3 more books. Yes. And then at the end of the 4th one, you're gonna say, why is there not another book? And I'm gonna have to tell you that my publisher said no more books. Because it's sort of
After hidden.
after Hidden, yes, there's 3 more books. So.
Would you talk about how you chose the professions for the wives in the
Well, the professions for the wives are kind of what they were in real life. Catherine was the first wife. And she is, in my book, she is, still home waiting for Hank to come back to her. And she's sequestered herself. I mean, one of the things with that is Catherine of Aragon was sent away. And wasn't allowed to see her daughter and, was very isolated, and Henry didn't want her to have any contact with anybody. So I made her agoraphobic, and so she's living in her house and doesn't go out. The second wife starts as the assistant. Anne Boleyn was a lady in waiting. She became the next wife. She had a lot of power. The third wife, they don't really get into Jane Seymour because nobody really knows a whole lot about her. There's no biographies. I have been looking, and it's actually kind of interesting that she's like the least known. I think the only Hilary Mantel, touches on her in her Wolf Hall trilogy, but that's more about Tom Cromwell than it is about Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour she's kind of a mystery. And I ignored her basically in this book because she's dead. The fourth wife. See, the thing, I love Anna Cleves. She was the fourth wife. She was the real survivor because she married him, didn't like him. They got divorced. And she lived the rest of her, she never got married again. And he gave her all these properties. And she had a really good life actually after she was married to him. And she's actually one of the more interesting people of that time. Catherine Howard was a bit of a train wreck, and she is in my book. She's young. And she really wasn't very smart. There have been books about her. And then Catherine Parr was, who's mostly the voice in this book. She was a fascinating woman. I mean, she's the first woman who had a book published under her own name in English. She wrote a book of religious writings. And I think she wrote 2 or 3. And she was really, really smart, and really she pushed along the whole Reformation and she was actually really good friends with, people like Anne Askew who got, killed she was murdered as a heretic, and she almost lost her head because she disagreed with Henry, but she managed to talk her way out of it. So so the wives, I tried to keep them as close as possible to who they actually were. And because they were all really very interesting. So.
I'm a bookseller here at the store, and I'm really obsessed with the Tudors, as you are. And I love your book.
Thank you.
I just think, part of it just cracked me up, like Catherine Howard as an actress, and Catherine of Aragon still making Henry shirts. All the little details that I know from having read almost every Tudor book I get my hands on. I just thought it was great, and I'm really looking forward to talking to customers about it. And you know, it's really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Catherine of Aragon did make his shirt.
She did make a shirt.
So why
Anne Boleyn
not?
Didn't like that.
Pardon?
And Anne Boleyn did not like that.
No, she didn't. No, she didn't.
And I thought that'd be great for, in the, you know, the scene in the book where, you know, she's sewing his shirt, and I thought, oh, she's, this part, too, this is great. So, yeah, and then Jane Rochford.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what you have her as, I don't want, you know, no spoilers, but that was really.
No, I
spot
know.
on, too.
I might have to kill her in another book because she does die later. Later.
Are you gonna write a second one?
I've got about 50 pages
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to bring it back a little bit more into history. I think the next one, I'm sort of envisioning like doing more with the fall of Anne Boleyn.
She's my favorite historical character.
She's really interesting. So, you know, she played the game, but she didn't follow through the way she should have. She was smart, but
then there was Cromwell. So there's that.
well, see, there is Cromwell. See, now he was fun to write too, because he's just so creepy,
Yeah.
and he was creepy in real life, and
Yeah.
he orchestrated everything, but then he dies too, you know, although, you know, he's still alive in my book, but,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
You know, the whole thing with Anna of Cleves and, you know, that wasn't good for him. So it's, you know, it's interesting because when I'm writing, I don't like to read other crime novels while I'm writing. Because I'm always afraid that it's gonna influence me a little too much. But when I was writing this book, I've just been reading everything about the Tudors that I can, because I keep feeling like, oh, I'm gonna find something that I can use. Some little tidbit of information that, you know, that maybe I haven't read before. And I can bring it into this book. So that's, you know, now I'm reading the book about the Dudleys now, of the House of Dudley, which is, it's very, very good and very interesting, and they were a fascinating family too. And then I keep, you know, my head goes ahead and it's like, oh, wow, you know, did Robert Dudley really kill his wife? Did he really throw her down the stairs, you know, or was it an accident? We don't know. So there's another book. You know, then there's Mary Queen of Scots. I mean, there's just murder everywhere. I mean, Scotland's just full of it. You know, I mean, yes, my agent is envisioning all these books and I was like, yeah, I gotta do one at a time. So, but it's, yeah, it's been really fun to sort of bring my two weird worlds together, because, you know, the thing is with this book is this is the book that I always wanted to write. And I've been working toward this for so long that I even said to my agent at one point, I said, I don't care if it gets published, I just have to finish it. Just to know that I've finished it. But I'm like so thrilled that it's actually been published so other people can read it too, and it's not just me.
So it's interesting because your other books, you know, they're not based in history, so you can take the plot anywhere you want it to go. So what was it like with this book? You are constrained to some degree by some kind of characters that are already written into history. Did you find it challenging? Were there particular things that were challenging about it? How do you approach that?
Well, when I really thought that I had to stick as close to history as possible, I had like total writer's block.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't do that. And plus, I write crime novels. I want there to be a twist. I want there to be a surprise. How many surprises are there? You have 2 dead wives. You know, you've got, you know, Henry VIII. You've got, you know, everybody knows the story. So when I finally allowed myself to go away from that, and I said, you know, I actually wrote the epilogue first. And then I said, I don't think this is gonna be. But I went back to it, and it's now the way it was when I first wrote it. Because I allowed myself to do that, and to have the little twist that's at the end of the book. But in the beginning, I was just like, yeah, no, I can't, I want to be true to the history, and it was very liberating to tell myself, okay, you don't have to be, it's okay. There's enough like little Tudor Easter eggs for people in this book, so that they'll be happy, but it does veer away. I have had some people say that it's not as close to history as they want it to be. Okay. Then write your own book.
Tell me about, I know you said there was a twist, that you came up with a twist to steer away from being locked into history, but how much do you know about your story when you're writing it? Are you like a linear writer, or do you like know what's going to be happening partway through and then go back and forth, or are you kind of just, let's see where this takes us?
I usually don't know anything. I just write the
Comes,
story. Like
yep.
I said, this started as a police procedural. I had a state trooper who was the main character. And then I said, oh God, no, what am I gonna do with him? This is about the wives. And, so then everything changed. But then I had a version of the book a couple of years ago. And I was just like, something's not right with this. I don't know what's right with it. I'm too close to it. So my former editor at Penguin is now a freelance editor. And so I reached out to her and I said, I'm willing to pay you. I just need somebody to help me sort of figure out what's wrong with this, because I know there's something wrong with it. And so she was, oh, this is great. I'm happy to look at it. A couple of weeks later, I get an email. I'm not going to charge you anything because I don't know how to fix this. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. This is your job. Editors should know how to fix something. But she said enough in the email that I started thinking, okay, I think it needs a total restructure. And I got rid of things. I got, at one point, Hank and Kate are in London. I'm like, why are they there? So that's out of there. I just started stripping stuff out of the book and completely rearranging it and moving things around. And that's, so, I actually wrote her when I got the book deal. And I said, I know you didn't think you knew how to fix this, but you told me enough so that it's not going to get published. So she was very excited about that. Although she did try to backtrack and say, no, I thought it was good. It's like, no, you didn't.
So that was what you needed to hear,
I needed to hear that, yes.
Yeah.
So it just, because sometimes when you're writing, you just, you can't see the forest for the trees. And I knew something was wrong with it, I just didn't know what. So it wasn't until I just started picking it apart that it all sort of finally fell together. So
When you're writing, do you hear your characters speaking to tell you what they want? Or
no, I'm not schizophrenic.
no, I mean, like,
No,
no.
no, I don't, it's just, I write and it just sort of happens. And I'll write 1,000 words one day and then the next day it's like, okay, I got to get rid of those, or I got to get rid of half of those, and it's not going the way it needs to go. And it's, I'm one of the, I write crime novels, mysteries where I don't know who did it most of the time until I do. And I remember with my first book, I was writing it and it was about 3/4 of the way through, and I said, oh, I thought I knew who the killer was. And 3/4 of the way through, I said, no, it's not him. It's this person. So then you have to go and completely rework things.
So it does kind of talk to you, but not
It does
the
a little
way,
bit, but
not in the way I'm thinking.
no, it's like, it's
hard to
more
describe.
structurally
Yeah.
and, you know. I mean, I don't walk around talking to my characters. Some people do, I think, but I don't do that. I mean, these characters were very real to me because I spent so many years reading about them. But, Annie Seymour, I got very attached. And, I hate to say it, but even Brett Kavanaugh, my tattoo artist, who has that unfortunate name. I liked her too. I know, I had no idea. I know, when he cut, I know, the hearings, I'm like, oh my God, he has the same name as my tattoo artist. I just wanted like an Irish name. I was like going through Google, looking for Irish last names, and I was like, oh, Brett would be good. Brett Kavanaugh, what a great name. Oh, if there's anything I wish I could change now, it's that. So.
Sorry, I'm full of questions. This is gonna be the last one.
No, that doesn't have to be the last one.
Can you tell us a little bit about your writing habits? Like, do you like to have a particular drink with you? Do you like to write in a particular place or time of day? What's your approach?
I have no approach.
No approach.
I have no approach. What's really interesting is now that I'm retired and I have no day job, I don't do a whole lot of writing. I kept thinking, oh, I'm gonna retire and I'm gonna have all this time to write. Isn't that great? And I read other people's books now because it's really fun to read other people's books. And the writing, I just figure it'll get done when it gets done. I was much more productive when I was working full time and I had a small child and I had a house to deal with and I had more things. I was busier then, but I was more productive with my writing than I am now. And which I don't know if it's just now, it's just because I'm older and I want to do it right. So if it takes, a few years, it takes a few years. I'm not gonna, I don't really need to push it anymore. It's, but I never had like a time that, I would come home at 3 o'clock in the morning from the register and write then for an hour. Or I would, when I was at the press, I was writing at lunch. I had my hour lunch and that's when I would write. So whenever I could find the time. So.
Why do you think you became a crime novelist versus another genre?
I was gonna write an Oprah book. I really wanted to write an Oprah book in the 80s. I wanted to be, like this, like women's fiction, the great American novel. And I wasn't writing, and nothing was coming to me. I was in my 20s though, so when you're in your 20s, you don't know what you're doing. And a friend of mine gave me a couple of mystery novels to read on vacation. And one of them was Sarah Paretsky, and the other one was Marcia Muller. And they were kind of, they wrote like the first like kick-ass private eye women characters in crime. And I read them and I was like, wow, this is what I want. I want to create a character like this. I think that this would be really fun. And I really didn't read mysteries. I mean, I read Nancy Drew when I was a kid, we all did, but it's Nancy Drew. But I started reading every mystery novel with a woman character that I could find. And just said, okay, this is what I want to try to do. And Annie Seymour grew out of that. I did have a mystery novel, one of my first attempts. It was all, because I said, write what you know. The plot had to do with groundwater pollution because I spent way too much time at planning and zoning meetings. So, and when I did actually finish that book and I showed it to my agent and he's just like, there's nothing sexy about that. So, but when I killed the Yale student in my first in Sacred Cows, he was really excited about that. Everybody wants to kill a Yale student. So, of course, that was before I worked at Yale. Although when I first started at the medical school, I had just turned in my third tattoo shop book, which had the mystery involved a murder at a lab at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. And there was a lab assistant who was the murderer. And that was when they found the woman in the wall at the medical school.
Oh my God.
And and it was very close to the plot in my book. And I was just like, oh God, I hope they don't fire me. Thinking that I actually had something to do with this, because I did not know anything about it. But then I said, oh, nobody here reads my books anyway, it's Yale. They're not gonna read mystery novels. So I was okay.
How did you educate yourself on the police procedure?
I was a reporter and I worked in newspapers. I mean, you just kind of learn how it all works. You cover fires and crime and I only covered 2 murders in the whole time I was a reporter. And both times they knew who did it. One of them, the murderer actually turned himself in. So there was no mystery. But, you cover courts, you cover crime, fires. It starts getting all ingrained in your head. And then when I moved from being a reporter to a copy editor, I was editing stories about this. So it just, it just sort of it's kind of logical to write crime anyway, after all of that. So, you know what that's like. Fellow reporter years ago. You also know the groundwater pollution stuff too. I spent much more time at planning and zoning meetings than I did covering crime. Bless you. Yeah, that was actually, it's kind of interesting. Although my first meeting, I remember I had no idea what was going on, and I went up to the planning and zoning commission after all these old men sitting at this table, and I said, "Okay, I need to know what a culvert is. I don't know what a culvert is." So I had all this. That's how you learn. Did you have another question?
I have no one.
Okay.
So you talked about, the way you got into crime writing was because we were consumed by, or you were inspired by reading my own investigators and books. And I think all of your protagonist something.
Yes.
Right? But you said you started this and the male protagonist first.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, why that? How was it trying to write from the male perspective?
He didn't last long.
No, I don't think it, but I'm curious about all that for your topic.
He didn't last long. I just thought that, well, this book also is written from the third person, which all my other books are first person. So it feels like when I'm writing those, when I'm writing in the first person, it's like I. So I do, you're getting a little. I do, because it's my voice. This was interesting, writing from the third person and writing from multiple points of view. Because this was my first foray into that. And, I kind of started out thinking that that's what I was going to do. And I think that's where the police trooper, he's still in the book, but, he's not the main investigator, the main character investigator, anymore. And he was, I dropped him pretty easily and pretty quickly, because I think I do I am more interested in the women. And it's funny because most of the books that I read are, have women characters and women, main characters. And I like books where, the women, there's groups of women who might come together. Like I just finished a book called The Bandit Queens, which is set in India, and it's just this group of women who, are sort of fighting the patriarchy, and, the main character, her husband has disappeared, and all the other women in the village come to her, and they think that she's killed him. And they all come to her because they want her to help them kill their husbands. It's brilliant, but it's all about the women in this, in this village. And I like books like that. It's interesting to see the different interactions between the women. And that was the one thing about this book is, having the wives kind of all alive at the same time to see how they would interact with each other. I mean, Anne Boleyn knew Catherine of Aragon. She worked for her as a lady in waiting, but they weren't friends, and once she got involved with Henry, they never really saw each other. So there was no real interaction there. Catherine Parr and Anne of Cleves, they weren't really, they weren't friends, but they have this odd bond in my book. And so we can see how that all happens. So it's,
Last question.
I'm halfway through the book. I am loving it. What I'm interested in sense of place. There's Long Island, Martha's Vineyard, New York City. When you in this book or any other book, are you really familiar with the places you write about, or do you feel like you could write something to a city or place you've never been? I'm just curious about, because it's such an incredible, conjures up a perfect picture of, especially Long Island, Martha's Vineyard.
Google Maps is a beautiful thing. You can drive around places, but not actually be there. I mean, my first series was all set in New Haven, easy. That was not difficult at all. But my second series, I set in Las Vegas. And about halfway through the first book, I said to my husband, I think we have to go to Las Vegas. Because Google wasn't really Google then. Yeah, it was a little bit. For Hidden, that's all set in all different places. Hidden's in Block Island. Then she goes to Quebec. I've been to all those places, so actually I could write about them. I don't really know Greenwich all that well. My Greenwich here is sort of fuzzy. They don't really have the beaches that I put in this book, but nobody really needs to know that. And I have found that Zillow is actually wonderful. I was on Zillow looking at these mansions, and I was just like, okay, I can do this. This is where my house is gonna be. So Zillow was good for Greenwich. It was for Martha's Vineyard. I've been to Martha's Vineyard a couple of times, but not for long periods of time. But Google Maps,
Wow.
this is technology. You can literally drive down a road and Google Maps. It's really quite fun. So see what's in the neighborhood. Yeah. So.
Thank you so much.